Okay, let's have a chat about some of your questions that have come in through social media. As I mentioned, I'm absolutely delighted to be co-hosting this event with Rebecca. She is a wonderful secondary teacher in Kenya and is part of our Kenya Connect community and partnership. We're delighted to partner with Kenya Connect. And Rebecca's subject is English, just like me, so you're joined by two English teachers today, but we promise to talk about other subjects. We've had a good chat about maths and science and all those other things. So yes, we've had a couple of questions come in, so we'll start with those, and then if anybody joins us, please feel free to just write at the bottom who you are, what your name is, and what your subject is. So the first question that we were asked, the actual question was about integrating 21st century skills into the classroom. Now, Rebecca and I had a really good chat about what we thought 21st century teaching skills meant, and whether it was digital led or whether it was higher thinking skills like critical thinking, creativity. So we'll address all of those things, really. I think the first thing to say is it's quite hard to integrate those into the classroom. One of the reasons is because so many schools do not actually allow for the digital devices to be used within the classroom and within schools. In a lot of schools, they're just not allowed. So absolutely encouraging digital skills. A lot of the time will happen outside the classroom, homeworks, that sort of thing. As for the other critical thinking, the high 21st century skills, thinking like critical thinking, creativity, Rebecca mentioned problem solving. One of the things that I do within my classroom is I do some project-based learning. And one of the examples that I've done is I think about what I want my students to learn and what they need to find out, and what is available for them to find out information as well. So one of the things that I do is, and that I have done in the past, is we've thought about theatres, because I've been teaching something to do with play or something like Shakespeare. And what Rebecca, are you okay to just mute for 1 second? Is that all right? Thank you. So what I do when I think about project-based learning is I think about I think about theatres. And what I'll do is I might say to the class, look, you've got to go and design a theatre. You've got to speak for 4 minutes about your theatre, but you can do whatever you want. Now, there is success criteria there, because what you want them to do is to fill 4 minutes of a presentation. That's quite a long time. Now, students will sit there and they'll interpret this question in very, very different ways. And they'll say, well, can I design a theatre? Can I just research a theatre? And you can say, you can do as you wish to, but you have to talk for 4 minutes. So some of students in the classroom might say, right, well, I'm really good at art. I'd like to do the creative side. What I want to do is actually build the theatre. Some of them will say, well, I'm really good at research, so I want to find out facts about a theatre. We could talk about where we want to put it in our city or location or wherever you might be in the region. Some people are really good at speech writing and they want to actually write, but ultimately they have to collaborate in a group, maybe about 4 of them, in order to create this speech. So it's all about collaboration, the problem solving, very much different styles of ideas. They've got to come up and collaborate to come up with something together. Now that would work in a science room as well. Thinking about something like, if you said to them, right, you've got to talk 4 minutes about gravity, you can say whatever you want to, but you have got to, the whole topic is about gravity. So project-based learning can be quite a useful tool in order to build on the collaboration, the critical thinking skills, and problem solving. And also that can include the digital learning skills as well, because some students will choose to step away from the classroom and use their phone in order to research or so forth. So I hope that's helpful. Did I cover everything, Rebecca? I'm not sure if I did or didn't. Was that okay? Oh, you're still on mute.
Sorry, every time we keep forgetting on
Don't worry.
getting your mic on, but I really like how you've covered that, giving an example in your area. That's quite authentic. It's something you've done. And like you're sharing with the lovely teachers on the call, it's something that it's doable, and we can share, or rather we can try it in our classrooms and see if it works, if that's the best way of how you could incorporate the digital skills or the 21st century learning skills in your classroom. So that was great, Alex.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Okay, I'm going to hand to you now because we've had a second question come in. So over to you completely, Rebecca, and I'll mute myself whilst you tell us about it.
Wow, so thank you, Alex. And before you go on mute, will you please read for me the question, the second question that came in?
The question was on how can we shift from a culture of passive learning to a culture of practical active learning?
Thank you. Thank you, teacher Alex. Thank you for reading that question out loud to me. And just using the same example that we have in a few seconds demonstrated here. This would be one way I would be trying to involve my learners actively. Like, for instance, if they're in a classroom and they have an article to read, instead of their teacher reading it to them, I would actually engage the students at one point or another to engage in the reading of that article, like what Alex did by reading the question to me. Not that I don't have the question on my end. I also have it, but I wanted to involve the student. So this is one way of carrying out active learning in the classroom. So traditionally, in most parts of the world, we've always had the teacher as the sage on stage. But with the 21st century learning design and skills, we are encouraged as educators to be the facilitators of learning and to be by the side of the students in their learning. And you find that most of the times when we engage in the model that we refer to as the teacher as the sage on stage, you'd find that most of the times you tend to be on the side, give instructions, give a lecture, and the whole learning situation is all about the teacher and not the learner. So practical active learning strategies actually engage the students in the learning. So we have the bit of engagement, which has not been quite a problem in achieving as a teacher, because if you talk of an English class, my area of interest, and I want the learners to write, I will ask them, just give them a line and ask them to write about it. So I would tell myself as a teacher of English in the classroom that my learners are engaged in learning, true, but is that active learning? Calls the question. Let's look at mathematics. I have maybe taking an example of a secondary school level math, and you want them to do some algebraic calculations. What will they do? I would ask them to calculate maybe, or look at the question, note it down, and go ahead and do some calculations. And I would have ticked my box of engagement, because it is my students who are writing the questions down in their book, or either if it's a whiteboard, it's them writing the questions on the whiteboard and engaging in the question. Yes, I have engaged the student. Here comes the question again, is that active learning? It is, but not 100%. It is to a very little extent where the learners engage with the materials and the resources that they are to use for their learning. But getting deep into the active learning concept, apart from engagement, we really need to have our learners reflect on the learning. Giving an example of English, for example, in a literature class, and apart from having the students discuss maybe some theories about how oral literature came up, or what would be the effect of written literature in their world at this time, or maybe giving them contemporary issues that have been reflected in a text, for example, a theme of corruption, for them to discuss. This is still at the engagement level. So if we bring our learners on the reflection level, then we are deeply and actively involving them into their learning. For instance, while discussing, for example, the effects of maybe bad leadership that have been brought out in a novel or a text, to reflect that, to engage the learners in the reflection of their learning, after having shared with me maybe the reasons that have been shared in the text of why bad leadership, or what are the effects of the bad leadership, then the students would go ahead and tell me, why did you have to think that this is a bad effect? Won't you think that this could have changed things this way? Or wouldn't the reason you've given changed the flow of issues in a different way? Then here, the learners would start reflecting on the feedback they had given you. So this is actively engaging the students in their learning. Now, when we get to, I've shared with you my area of interest, that is English and literature. If we have maybe a mathematics teacher on board, he could go ahead and share with us, for example, having engaged the learners in their learning, maybe of calculating the area of a cuboid, how would you engage the learners to reflect on their learning? So as we have somebody come on board, maybe a math teacher, do we have anybody in math, Alex?
Not at the minute, we do not. So you carry on, Rebecca. We'll assume that our example is correct because we've got no maths teachers to let us know we're not. So you carry on talking about the area because I think it's a lovely example.
Okay, thank you so much, Alex. So with the area, for example, I will look at the 2 bits of active engagement in learning. That is their engagement in the learning process and also the reflection. So let's get to the engagement level. So I might not be able to use the most appropriate example in the field because I'm not a math person, and I really struggled with getting to understand mathematics during my days in school. All the same, they make sense right now. So you will just forgive me if I give rather an area which is not so secondary school-like, but at least the primary level, which at least I'm conversant with. So taking an example of learning the areas, or rather calculating the area of different shapes. So you are told of the formulas. If you want to calculate the area of a square, if you want to calculate the volume of a cuboid, if you want to calculate maybe the area of a rectangle, or maybe you want to calculate the area of a triangle. If I recall those school days, the formula went like area of a triangle is a half base times height. I don't know if I'm correct. Mathematics teachers in the house, you would correct me on that. So sometimes you'd find that we talk of the formula is area a half base times height, but this does not make sense to the student. So to engage this learner to understand the concept of area of a triangle or even the volume of a cuboid, you would have them come with different triangular objects in the classroom. So student A would come with maybe a right angled triangle. Then we would have student B who would come with a cube, and would have student C who would come with a cuboid. Remember, our area of interest is calculating the area. I will engage them, for example, by having them go right ahead and measure the area of the particular objects that they've brought in the classroom. So I just want to imagine nobody will carry a whole house in the classroom, but they'll have some little objects that are measurable in the classroom so that our practical activity is realistic. So I'm not talking about like we want to measure something so big, something so huge. So when you engage the students in coming with this object, so for example, a student would see that from their set, they have a set square. A set square is in form of a rectangle. Now they will use the long centimeter ruler to measure maybe the length of this particular set square. Somebody else might have come with something like this that I'm holding, okay? So looking at it's quite small, it's quite practical that the children can use their ruler to measure this. So they could measure the length, they could measure the width, they could also measure the height, you know, and note that down. So in their groups, after having noted such down, the concept of measuring the volume of a cuboid, measuring the area of a triangle now becomes real. Like they can see with a triangle, this is the base, and this is what we refer to as the height, you know. So at that particular moment, I have engaged the students in the learning process. Now, after they've calculated the area, what is the whole essence of calculating the area of a place? Now, this brings in the reflection aspect. So as they reflect, why were we calculating the area? Why were we calculating the volume of a cuboid? So when they engage in this deep thought process, it gets to them. For example, with a cuboid, maybe they would start figuring out, okay, so this is how I can calculate the volume of a particular object to see how much content it can carry, and now associate this lesson to what happens at home. So for example, if I want more water, what kind of an object will I go for? If I'm looking for a water tank, should I go for a cylindrical object or should I go for a cuboid bucket? So now they are reflecting and now they're making sense of what they learned in the classroom and associating it with real life situations. At the end of the day, the student will leave the class feeling or adding meaning to what they're learning in school, because this could help them make better decisions back at home. So this, I would say, would be one way of incorporating the active learning aspect, moving from the passive bit to the active bit, whereby the learner gets to get engaged in their learning and to make meaning of their learning, such that at the end of the day, they don't feel it's a bother being in school, but it's a place where I can learn concepts that would help me on a day-to-day life. Alex, back to you.
Thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We've actually had some feedback for you. Indigo says the distinction between engagement and deeper active learning is really helpful. So thank you. So thank you so much, Rebecca. That's so fantastic. And we've got a few people liking the video now. So it's lovely example and so clearly explained, Rebecca. We've had another question. How would a teacher with a really large class manage assessment? So I guess I'll kick off a little bit and then Rebecca, feel free to chip in at any stage. I think the first thing to say is that there's the two types of assessment, formative assessment and summative assessment. Summative assessment happens at the end. So we're thinking about end of tests, end of year, end of term, end of topic tests. They're quite formal. And those quite often are more easily manageable with a large class, because quite often they're completed on paper as an exam paper, something like that. Formative assessment is the type of assessment that should happen every single day in your classroom. And it's the thing that sometimes gets left behind when it comes to assessment, because people really think about summative. I really like, we've got there's quite a few different strategies on the Teach2030 website that we talk about with formative assessment strategies. It's about checking the learning before you progress. So if you do a quick activity, a quick bit of learning, how do you know that your learners have learnt? How do you know that the information has been imparted and that it has been successfully taken on by the students? So to give you just a couple, it's a do now strategy at the beginning of the lesson can be really useful to connect the previous learning to see whether they know something. So for example, if you're thinking, you write a quick sentence on the board, which one's the adjective? Start by just writing it, identifying it. If you're beginning with thinking about adjectives for your lesson or word types, just to see what the students know. I really like the 5-finger technique. How well are you understanding me? 5 is the top, 1 is the least, and then lots of your students you can see straight away what the numbers are. You'll see that people who are 1 or 2 kind of hide them underneath their desk a little bit. And although you might not be aware of what they don't know at that point, you do know they're not feeling confident. So it might be time to just stop a little bit. No hands up works really well. For example, if I'm explaining something and I think, have they understood it? I might say, promise, tell me what you think about what I've just said. Can you just repeat back what it was that I've defined, and seeing whether you can do a no hands up quick scan. That can work really well as well. Anything that you want to comment on, Rebecca, with regards to assessment, formative or summative assessment?
Yes, thank you, Alex, and also thank you to the teacher who, wow, thank you for asking that question. It's been something that for quite a long time teachers have been struggling with, and like Alex has shared, the formative aspect of it and the summative aspect of it. Now, from the description that Alex has shared of what formative assessment is and also what summative assessment is, handling this class, like the question was just general on assessment, whether it's formative or like summative. Like, so the summative bit of it is usually, I usually refer to them in quotes as the more formal, acceptable form of assessment, and the one that for quite a long time has been used by teachers in the classroom to measure learning. But research has it that yeah, it's poking holes on the kind of summative assessments that we give. Now, bringing in context on what happens in my country is that you'd find that learners go through their learning process. Mostly one kind of assessment is the national assessment that brings on board all students from a certain level, a certain grade level, sit a particular kind of exam. And research has poked holes into that. And you'd find that as a teacher, the feedback you get from such assessment is usually not satisfactory enough to judge like the ability of a child in a particular area. So for assessment, if I'm asked, especially for a large classroom, it is highly dependent on whether you want to conduct something formative to inform your teaching, or you want to do something that is summative. So happy with technology that we've had quite a lot of innovations coming up. For example, we've seen the gamification bit of formative assessment coming in through apps such as the Kahoot. And if you happen to be blessed in your particular school and you have gadgets that you could use, you have connectivity, then a Kahoot to do for you in as far as you trying to get some feedback from your learners to inform your teaching, such that you conduct a formative form of assessment, the children are excited about it, you want to do a lesson review, then a Kahoot could be good. But looking at scenarios whereby we don't have this technology, I think it calls for a teacher's innovative way. Like I love what is shared on the Teach2030 website on their courses. We have, like, for example, the do now technique. that could be used as a formative assessment way of trying to catch up with what the learners are getting to learn. Like every time you get into the classroom, maybe Alex, you could share with them the link to these different courses that are sharing these nice strategies that a teacher could use for formative assessment. Then on the bit of summative assessment, especially for the large groups, you'd see that these are also guided by different policies in our institutions. And the policy of school A is quite different from the policy of school B. And you'd find that the most effective way that a teacher would go through this is basing their assessment. As you create the assessment, you should have at the back of the mind the needs of the curriculum, also the particular goals of a particular learning area, and the expected outcomes that you are planning to come up with. This would directly guide on how best you could be able to tackle a summative assessment that would give you sufficient feedback to help with the learning in the classroom. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so like what is being shared on the screen?
Thank you. So
yes,
I was just going to say, I'm just putting up the Teach2030 website for everybody, and just the course that really we've been talking loads about today between us, haven't we, about practical active learning and making sure that your learners creating a culture of learning. I think this is the course that you and I have naturally just zoned in and focused on today with everything that we've covered so far. So this is the course I'd highly recommend our listeners to take. It is completely free. If you visit teach2030.com and just visit the top where it says courses and then teachers, and it is completely free at the moment. If you use the code Teach2030, you get the second part free. Normally we have the free part 1 and then a paid part 2, but it is completely free at the minute to take part 2. Just use the code Teach2030. And this is the course that I'd really recommend with what we're talking about, project-based learning. We've been talking about active learning strategies that Rebecca was talking about. The idea of assessment is covered in many of the different courses, but it definitely gives you the do now that Rebecca and I both mentioned are within this course. So this would be the course that I'd really highly recommend. I think this is probably a good place to stop, don't you think, Rebecca? Is there anything that you want to add?
Okay, not so much, just saying thank you to the great teachers who have tuned in. And teachers are lifelong learners. Like, we learn on a daily basis, we learn from one another, we learn from our shared experience and all that. So highly encouraging everyone, bring everyone on board, those who are in your school, so that we can share and reflect on the best learning strategies that we can use with our students in the classroom. Thank you so much.
I couldn't have said it better, and I'm not going to add anything more to that, because thank you, Rebecca. That's the perfect way for it to finish. I just want to say thank you so much, Rebecca, for coming and co-hosting. It's been an absolute joy, and we are looking forward to seeing our primary specialist, Eleanor, next month, and she will take on any questions on primary. We hope you've really enjoyed it today, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.